So, my online people, I always think that I don't have to explain things, but repetition, retention through repetition. I should get it tattooed on my arm. So, we have a website, and the website is TripleThreat.polishsolid.com. And there is a schedule on that website. And the schedule I would suggest is the schedule at a glance. And if you go to a schedule at a glance, you can actually see what we're doing today. And from 12:30 to 2, we were having a break. So everyone who was freaking out about where is the stream, there was no stream because we were all eating. So, if you want to be in this experience with us out at home, please look at the schedule so we can be in alignment and you're not freaking out. All right. So, we're going to have a fantastic roundtable about Vanity 6, the album, and it's going to be a female-only panel. That was really important to me for this. And we're going to talk about that in a hot second. And then after that, we're going to have a 30-minute break, live streamers. We're going to have a 30-minute break in between the Vanity 6 album roundtable and the 1999 tour roundtable, just so we can do a bio break, take care of our bodies, stretch, and all of that jazz. And then we're going to take a full 2 hours for dinner. So again, we can take care of our bodies and eat and actually move around. So there will definitely not be a stream from 5:30 to 7:30 Eastern Daylight Time, I think EDT. However, what you don't want to miss out there in live streaming world is our keynote. And also, if you're watching online and you're local, it would be very appreciated if you would actually show up for Jill Jones. You don't have to show up for me. I know some of the speakers probably don't like hearing that because they probably want people to show up for their presentations and roundtable discussions. But if you're going to show up for anybody, please show up for Jill Jones. That's my only request. And Jill will be with us today from 7:30 until 9 p.m. Eastern Time. And then just make sure you're with the schedule. So if you go to the stream and it's not working, it's probably because we're on a break. So I just want to make that clear. Okay, so that was to my online audience. For my speakers who are in the house, the online people are telling me you are not speaking into the mic. They say they can't hear you. So don't be doing let's try to make sure we speak into the mic because I've gotten so many emails. I can't hear. People won't speak into the mic. Blah, 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 blah. So please speak into the mic. That would be very, very helpful so that the people who are on the live stream can hear us. And I really want to thank everybody who is on the live stream for being there. But more importantly, I really want to thank everyone who is in the audience right now for being here in person. Some of you have traveled. Some of you have traveled long distances to be here, and I mean long distances. We have, again, Declan from England. I just met someone from Chicago. I met someone from Houston. I have people from Arizona. I have people from California. There are actually a lot. Columbus, Ohio. We got to shout out Columbus, Ohio, because that's where part of my family is. Like we are, Buckeyes. So we got to make sure that we shout them out. So I would say something else, but I won't. Okay, so we are here for Prince. I have this event thing. I didn't share it this time, but it's actually something that Robert Loss loves. It basically says, when you do an event, whoever shows up are the people who should be there. Whatever happens, happens. And we're going to have a good time. So I'm having a blast, even though, my energy level is a little low, but I'm having a blast because this is for Prince, this is for Vanity 6, this is for the time, this is for What Time Is It? One of the best albums ever recorded, ever, period, the end. We could go home now. So I'm happy. So I think the people who are here in the audience are happy. Hopefully the online audience will become happy too. So I apologize for all the tech issues you might be experiencing. So without further ado, we're going to bring up our panel for our Vanity 6 Roundtable. So let's give them a hand. So we are missing Malay. She will not be joining us today, but we have Chinisha, who is going to be moderating for us, Chinisha Scott, and let's give Chinisha a hand. We have Rhonda Nicole, the lovely Rhonda Nicole. And we have Laura Tiebert, who is looking fantastic. Every time I look at you today, Laura, I'm thinking Morris Day, Morris E. Day. Yes. And Brittnay isn't here yet, so whenever Brittnay comes, if you're out there, if you can hear us, please come. But if not, we are going to roll with who we have, because that's the way we do it. And what we're going to do, like we did last time, for those of you who may have questions that they want to ask about in response to the roundtable, let me put up this Minty. Give me 1 second. And actually, let me go through this because I realized I didn't do this the last time. So if you want to ask a question, you just go to a browser on your phone and you type in menti.com, which is MENTI.com. And then you type in the code 32624408 this particular time. And then there's going to be a gray bar in that middle of the screen that says Open Q&A. So you want to click on that Open Q&A, and then you'll get a blue button that says Ask New Questions. And you can actually ask as many questions as you like. I am going to probably stop taking questions probably maybe 15, 20 minutes towards the end so I can give the questions to Chinisha. And for those of you who don't want to use menti.com or you don't have a cell phone, you got some Post-its, some note cards that you can actually just hand write, which is becoming a lost art. So if you want to hand write your notes, your questions, I apologize, just do so and bring them to me, and I'll make sure that Chinisha gets them. So that way you can participate here, but also those of you who are out online, you can also participate and ask questions. So I hope that you will. So I just want to make sure, Brittnay, you're not here. Are you here, Brittnay? Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Chinisha.
Thank you so much. I'm loud, though. Y'all can hear me, right? We'll figure it out. 1, 2, 1, 2. Is that? Okay. Yeah. Okay. We can still hear me, right? Okay, great. Thank you, D'Angelo. Can we give a round of applause to D'Angelo? Without our steward, our magical lady at the helm, we would not have a symposia, and so have any symposia. So I'm really grateful to be here again. I bully her all the time, so that's why I get to show up. And we got Brittnay! Yay! I'm gonna ask a favor, if I can, since we feel like a smaller group. Can we just do a little bit of this so we can talk to each other? Yes. Nice. And also get into these outfits because they came correct today. The pink, looking extraordinary.
Thank you.
So I'm gonna do a quick thing, and I'm gonna intro some folks that we have on stage so that you know why they're here, because they're experts and they're brilliant. I'm Chinisha, and I'll introduce myself, toot toot. I am an Emmy Award nominated, award-winning, multi-hyphenate creator in film and television. I do all kinds of things. I worked in, volunteered in politics. I've run for office. I currently work at The Daily Show as a segment director. And I just really love Prince, like a lot. And that's why I'm here. To my left, I have Rhonda Nicole, an LA-based independent singer-songwriter, music journalist, and social digital marketing executive. Get into that. She was a former managing editor at SoulTrain.com, toot toot, and has interviewed a number of Prince-related artists, including Jill Jones, F. Deluxe, Liv Warfield, and Andy Allo. And she's here because she also loves Prince, presumably. She's going to talk to us today a little bit about Vanity 6. To her left, we have Laura Tiebert, who's Laura Tiebert is the co-author of the 2017 biography, The Rise of Prince, 1958 to 1988, with Alex Hahn. And her experience delving into Prince's extraordinary life inspired her to live like him for an entire year. And I have questions, and I'm sure everyone else does too. And to her left, the extraordinary Brittnay, who made it on time, and we're so grateful. Yes. Brittnay Proctor-Habil received her PhD in African American Studies from Northwestern University and is a Mellon postdoctoral fellow in Race and Median Studies from my alma mater, the New School. Yay! I actually had a professor from the New School who went to Northwestern, and I wonder if y'all know each other, because same department. All right, afterwards, we'll chat. Her interests include Black studies, Black popular music and culture, gender and sexuality studies, Black feminist theory, sound studies, visual culture, and performance. And we are so honored to have them all here to talk about the extraordinary Vanity 6. Yeah. Let's go, talk about it. And we're gonna take a water break, real quick. All good. No, thank you. I appreciate you. So, I mean, we can get right into it. And I'm curious how each of you found yourselves here talking about Vanity 6. Like, what is the draw about these 3, sometimes 4 women? And anyone can start. Please feel free to jump in.
I guess since I was late, I will.
First to fall on her sword is Brittnay.
Is the mic on? Hi, okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here on a Friday afternoon. It's not the morning anymore. I think, so a lot of my relationship to music comes from my relationship to my father, and so I had the fortune of having parents that played a lot of Prince and played a lot of music of the 1980s in general, and so my draw to this panel, and D'Angela, I've been lucky enough to know, invited me to this work, because in general, I'm interested in Black women's performance of the 1970s, 1980s. I grew up listening to the work of Vanity 6. I really admired their work because of, them kind of standing out in a kind of caveat of post-soul moment, Ronald Reagan, the culture wars, folk being very dogmatic around sex and sexuality, and to see a collective of women really be audacious and to embody their sexuality and perform their sexuality in particular ways has always spoken to me and drawn me in. So I think for those reasons I'm here today.
Amazing, thank you.
Well, I'll tell you, hi everyone. It's so great to be here and thank you for having me. In real time I was not aware of Vanity 6, but in preparing for this talk, I found a live performance on YouTube, really poor quality, grainy. I see some of you nodding, maybe you've seen it, from the Met in Bloomington, Minnesota, this month, 1983, 40 years ago this month, and I'm telling you, you will not find a more entertaining 18 minutes. So I am here to love on Vanity 6, to give them their flowers, as D'Angela said about Jill, because I think in real time, they didn't receive the flowers that they deserve, so here to give them today.
Similarly, so when the Vanity 6 album came out, I was still single-digit age. So I had no connection to them up until a little bit deeper into my tweens, I think. I knew of them because, you know, I would see Soul Train or whatever, but obviously I wasn't allowed to engage. I didn't know to engage, so there was no connection back then. And then, of course, when I just kind of went full throttle into Prince in '84, when I was still single-digit age, but whatever, then I started to kind of, you know, go back and explore all of the different music that had come before Purple Rain and that I had not really had any kind of real connection to, and developing that connection. So when D'Angela invited me to be part of this panel, I was like, oh my gosh, because this is something that I've never had a chance to talk about in any kind of significant way, to talk about the impact of the music, the impact of the imagery. By the way, all of the presentations this morning were incredible and so inspiring, and I think that this is the perfect time to start having these kinds of conversations, especially as we start, you know, as we are seeing so many different changes that are happening within music and popular culture around women and sexuality and sexual agency, and I think Vanity 6 are literally the poster girls for that.
There's not much more you can add to that. I will give my 2 cents. And for context, the Vanity album came out a couple years before I was born. Not that many, but a couple. So my introduction to Vanity 6 was through Prince, as I imagine most of us were. So I was a Prince fan before I became a Vanity 6 fan, but I enjoyed them, and because it was the blessing of Prince, I walked into that universe. But like my conception of who Vanity was as a person didn't actually come into fruition until I saw Enter the Last Dragon. And so from watching that, that's when I kind of got more into listening to the Vanity 6 albums, and then deeper and deeper. So with that said, do any of you have a favorite song from the Vanity 6 album?
I'll tell you, mine were just the opposite of Dr. Powell's students. So, you know, I've got Gen Z kids, so I kind of get where they're coming from. But yeah, I would say, I mean, listen, Nasty Girl, #1. I almost want to just set that aside because it's such a favorite, such a strong, I mean, you know, such a strong song. But I love Makeup. And I love Drive Me Wild. I love Susan's songs because to me they still sound fresh. They still sound, you know, current, different, and you want to listen to them a couple times still. And then I think too, having Makeup on the Originals album just sort of shed a whole new light on that song for me. And I went back and listened to Susan. I love Susan's delivery though. I love the way she speaks, and I love her intonation. So those are my 2 favorites, setting aside Nasty Girl.
Nasty Girl's a gimme. If anybody in here doesn't like Nasty Girl, you are graciously asked to leave now. Thank you. Do you have any other favorites on the album?
Obviously Nasty Girl. And I'll tell you a really quick, very funny to me story. I had a memory this morning that has been locked away for about 16,000 years. And so towards the tail end of the morning presentations, I sent a Facebook message to my college sorority chapter, and I was like, y'all, did we do a step show to Nasty Girl? Because I have a memory. And they were like, you didn't, but the line before. So I was like, okay, I'm not crazy. There is a Nasty Girl thing that happened in college, the Kappa Mu chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. I did not make it up. It has been confirmed. I just wasn't in the show. I just saw it. So anyway, so obviously Nasty Girl. I love If a Girl Answers, Don't Hang Up. I was thinking about what Elliot shared earlier about his students, and I was like, what his students haven't learned yet is that sometimes you have to smack a bitch, and that's what that song is about. And in thinking about how they were talking about it's not, you know, female solidarity, I was like, yes, it is, because Brenda and Susan were ready to ride. Yes, it was. They were just gonna smack that other girl. But when I fell in love with that song in high school, and I had a friend in high school named Sophie, and we used to act it out. I went to a performing arts high school, so a lot of crazy shit happened. But we used to act it out because she had never heard it. And so I was listening to it, and I let her hear it. She's like, oh my God, I love this. And I was like, I've corrupted somebody else's child. So I love that song. And then I also really love Makeup. I liked it, you know, back in the day. And as Laura pointed out, hearing it again with Prince singing it, or performing it on the Originals compilation was really dope. So.
Makeup is nasty as hell.
Yeah,
like just the
it's-
groove on it is so it's like your face stinks. That's what it is when you listen to that. And I just recently rediscovered, or maybe discovered for the first time, because I quite frankly don't really remember the song. If a girl answers, don't hang up. No spoilers, but yeah, you guys should go to all the events this weekend. Is all I'll say. Recently rediscovered that song and was thinking about. In discussion about the lyrics, how there's so much double entendre always written into the lyrics. And the first time reading through, I was like, what the hell is he talking about? None of these, you're trying to cut ass, but not really cutting ass. It's terrible. And then you start to read into it, it's like, oh, this is actually brilliant, the way he's playing with the turns and how each of the women are like going back and forth with one another. Brilliantly put together. And also sometimes you gotta be a ride-or-die bitch. Yes, that's a fact. Absolutely.
And it also helps that, per Vanity's recollection, like that actually happened to her, and she told the girls, and like the song spurred out of that. So yeah, I love makeup too. It's so much fun. It's stank. It really embodies, I think, Prince's sound, but also is accounting for the kind of everyone's strengths in the group. So I love makeup as well.
One song that you brought up was the Drive Me Wild, right? Was that? Yes. And we were actually looking at the video just before this all started and having this like sidebar conversation about sexuality and what that looks like on different women, and especially the way that Susan particularly kind of was infantilized. Like this notion of being like very young is the way that sexiness comes out. And each of the women has their own expression of sexiness, I think. And then Brenda is a bit more stern, but has like a strength in her sexiness. And Vanity is just like the epitome of like the allure. So I was just curious about like, what are your thoughts about how we look at sexuality and how we look at Vanity as a girl group expressing very like explicit sexuality in a very sex positive way, mostly. End of conversation.
I think going back to the work of Vanity 6, in preparation for this roundtable, I felt some tension between the group's own embodiment of the work, their own performativity of the work, their own, there's discourse around writing on the album, but their own, what they brought to the album as creatives and creators. And then on the one end, Prince is like very meticulous, overbearing, kind of, needs to have his full hand in the creative process around Vanity 6. And so it's something that I'm still wrestling with and I don't always feel the most comfortable with, in particular in thinking about the ways in which Vanity 6 is sexualized, each member, and in particular Susan's sexualization, and the idea that they say she was 16, but was not 16, but how that was played up often in a lot of interviews they did together. And I want
in the beginning of that video,
right.
It's like she's a child in bed with a teddy bear.
And if we know that in some ways Prince has this large hand in cultivating the image and like the self-representation of this group of like young women, there's this tension that comes together in my mind around, his hand in that in many ways, but also these women, really performing their asses off, making the most of this opportunity and really, being affirming and putting their foot down around what they have to say about the kind of work that they're doing. Yeah.
We talked a little bit. You mentioned like Baby Spice, and or it might have been you mentioning like Baby Spice. That same kind of correlation between like women who are very much adult women, but are also like framed in this youthful way, or the primacy of youth for these kinds of women in these spaces. Just a thought, just something interesting thinking about, especially when we're supposed to be looking at them as sexual icons. Like, what does that do? How does it place them in the time? And like, has that changed very much between 82 and 2023? Like, how different is a woman's sexuality between then and now?
I mean, and actually the women were, I think, 2 or 3 years apart in age. I mean, they were essentially like the same age, but I think, they each were given a role to play or felt that they had a role to play and then just sort of expanded on it. So Susan's was sort of the wearing white, and it, brought up sort of the sexy virgin kind of idea. And they're all caricatures in so many ways, But I was encouraged again to refer back to Dr. Powell's Gen Z students. I was encouraged that they took the empowered part from it, and because I myself have veered between, is this exploitative or is this empowering? So I was glad to see that the new generation is leaning towards empowerment, because was it empowering to stand on stage in your lingerie? I honestly, maybe, but I don't know.
I mean, it always is until it isn't, right?
Right.
It feels great until it's not, and then
exactly.
I love that Alicia talked about the fast tail girl thing, because I think especially for those of us who are black women, we grew up being told and having it made very clear to us that there were certain things that we were not to embody. And so for me, as a very young girl looking at these women, I knew that I was not supposed to embody that. But if my grandparents were here, they would tell you about the show that my cousin and I did when we were 10 and 9 respectively. We did the whole Apollonia 6 album in our church slips. And it was at the house, nobody else saw it, but I mean, just the fact that they were just like, okay, this is all right. But it's very interesting now, because as a grown-up, I think about how interesting it would have been to have maybe been a teenager for me when these women were doing their thing, when they were performing on Soul Train, when they were touring the world, to have been able to see it then at a time when I would have been coming into my own sexually. But now I look at it and I do see the empowerment, and I also have questions about agency, as always. So it's like it's very empowering. I had a great shot of Vanity 6 on my phone for a while. It's just my screensaver, and one of my little cousins who's 9 saw it. They're twins, so they were both looking at my phone, and one of them was like, who is that? And I said, it's a group called Vanity 6. And they looked at Vanity and they were like, she's a cool girl. And I was like, how do you know that at 9, that she's a cool girl? I mean, what is it that tells you that? But I certainly I did not have that impression when I was very young, seeing those images initially. It was confusing, because it's like, well, that's not ladylike, and it's not correct. And then you grow up and you're like, it's everything. If you know how to harness that power and you have the agency to do so.
Do you think that time changed the context of how you looked at those women? Because if young people in 2023 have a different vision of what sexuality is and how they're supposed to express it. So I think looking at images like Vanity 6, the covers and the albums and the videos and all that, I don't know if they notice. Like, I don't know if the level of sexuality registers for them. And do you think that maybe for you impacted how you saw them when you saw them?
Absolutely. I think that even if I had been a little bit older then, it would have been like, oh my God, that's, whew. Whereas now, to your point, I think that we're so accustomed to seeing sexuality presented and expressed and portrayed in certain ways from women that we don't have the same reaction to it. So like when Meg and Cardi performed on the Grammys a few years ago, I thought about Madonna rolling around on the floor at the AMAs. Was it the AMAs? Or the VMAs. Anyway, the first time she did like a Virgin Live, and people were like, oh my goodness. And now we're watching Meg and Cardi do a whole thing, and it's just like, that's live. Like we don't have the same response to it. So I definitely think the times have changed.
Is that a good thing? I don't know. I don't know. Sometimes I think it's great. Sometimes I think it's wonderful that we can fully embody our bodies and show them or not show them if we want to. And then I think there are other times where it implicitly gives other people permission, or they think that's permission, and I wonder what that does for consent. I wonder what that did for consent then, when that was a way more taboo than it is now. I don't have answers. These are all questions.
Yeah, I also think we're in a curious moment, because there is a bunch, we are exposed to sexualization in like every single thing that we come across, that we consume. and yet there's still this conservative turn and bend that is very much so trying to shut down discourses on sexuality and sex. And so I think times have changed, but also it's a very interesting time where young people are exposed to, again, a lot of, are sexualized or are exposed to modes of sexualization, but are also don't have, you can't teach sex ed in many schools, or there isn't a sex ed course, or there's legislation passed around whether sex ed can be taught in schools, and you can't have access to Planned Parenthood because your legislature is passing bills to defund it, and you don't have access to condoms or other forms of contraception, or access to information around sexual praxis. So yeah, we've come a long way, but looking back to the work of Vanity 6, it feels like this is another front of the same culture war, right, that we're encountering, and it's kind of a little depressing to see, like, folk were really upset about Vanity 6 performing in lingerie on stage and made it seem as if they were promiscuous by way of the way they dressed, or the context of content of their lyrics, or the way that they performed on stage. And in some ways that's changed, but in a lot of ways, to your point on consent, there's still a lot of discourse around, like, well, they had it coming because of X, Y, and Z. I think it's part of this larger regression back, and a turn away from a lot of the gains that folk have made around sexuality, especially in the public sphere. Yeah.
Oh, it's 100% a pendulum swing, and someone can fact check me on this. But recently legislation was introduced in, like, Alabama or Kentucky, one of those places. So elitist, sorry. Where some legislation was presented that they should not be providing tampons or sanitary napkins in schools, like junior high and high school, because it's woke. Like, providing tampons is too woke, and so therefore should not be allowed in schools. And I'm like, I didn't understand that having a plug for the blood is now too woke. So one of my coworkers said, would you rather have them free bleed, or would you like to give them a tampon? And I was like, well, I don't actually know anymore. So to your point, there's 100% a pendulum swing. There always, every time we make 5 steps forward, 10 steps back in terms of how we view women's bodies, or bodies of people that are not cishet white men.
Yeah, I mean, same as it ever was, right? Because I can't help but think of the moral majority. And, in 1983, the moral majority was protesting Sandra Day O'Connor being nominated to the Supreme Court, right? So that's what we're up against in 1983. And to your point, a lot of it just sadly seems to swing back. But I really think, this whole, to take Vanity 6 in the context of, the whole Triple Threat tour, it does very much seem to me like Prince was holding up a mirror to society. He was exposing the hypocrisy of society in a lot of ways, right? I mean, one of the things we're most hypocritical about is sex. We say one thing in public, or the moral majority is doing, carrying this party line, but behind closed doors, an entirely different thing might be going on, right? So when we see Vanity 6 sort of stripped right down to their underwear, right, to quote from the immortal DMSR, it's really sort of exposing what's inside, what's under the covers, right, and being vulnerable. I mean, I think that's why I love Vanity 6. It's the vulnerability of it, and rather than the bluster and the some of the surface things about society that we're so dominant, we're just sort of vulnerable and out here and saying what we want. And it was, I think in 1983, it was an incredibly brave thing to do.
Very bold. Yeah, I'm just thinking about do whatever we want. Wear laundry at a restaurant. It reminds me of Boomerang, where Grace walks into the restaurant literally like that, and it's that is a spectacle for that time. And if you saw Grace walk in a teddy today, you'd be like, oh, cute, that's nice. Where'd she get that, Fenty? That's what my next question would be. So the context, I think the way we absorb spectacle And I wonder, about media, where, we had TV, we had a couple of channels, you go to the movies, that is the extent of the media that you're consuming, where today, Twitter, OnlyFans, TikTok, Instagram, there's you're constantly consuming media and everyone's trying to one-up one another. I wonder what the spectacle does. Would Vanity be the spectacle that they were today?
No. I don't think there's probably not.
I want to take a quick pause right here. I'm so curious about this year in the life of Prince, and I need to know more about it. You don't got to go into all the nitty-gritties, but I'm very curious about what it meant to live like him for a year.
Oh, well, as I was researching the biography that I wrote with Alex Hahn, I started to see patterns of behaviors and habits that Prince did, that I started to think maybe this is, what really made him successful. And I think my sort of thesis, if I had one, was that anyone who becomes a global superstar is doing something different from the norm, right? I mean, we can all agree on that. So I wanted to explore that, and I became a little bit of an experimentalist. I mean, I'm just an everyday person. I was a mom living in Chanhassen, and I thought, well, why don't I just try a couple things like this for myself? So each month I would pick one thing, and I would do it for a month, and I blogged about it. I chronicled my journey, and then when the month ended, I would go on and do the next thing. So for example, in 1 month, I adopted a symbol as my name. I created a symbol, and I put it on a name tag, and I introduced myself that way for a month.
Well, you got to tell us what the symbol was.
It was actually a heart surrounded by the rays of a sun, and I designed it. I was taking a watercolor class at the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum, and I had help from some talented classmates. But it really was a reminder to share myself with others, even when it scared me. And I was scared a lot when I was living like Prince. I wanted to quit all the time. But I took on an alter ego 1 month. I said no. I said no to things that weren't right for me, which was really difficult as a born people pleaser. But Prince was just no. I'm not going to do it. No, and
I heard Alphabet Street in my head.
no, no.
Sorry.
It was freeing. It was freeing. So yeah, as the year progressed, I really felt myself transform, and so I've got a book proposal out with some publishers, and it's called Lessons for This Thing Called Life, a princely guide to self-empowerment, and I hope it can inspire some other people if a publisher decides to take it on. Thank you.
You need a part 2 where you do an entire year in lingerie, just all Vanity 6. I love that. I do, very much. This looks like we're getting audience questions. Awesome. All right. Okay, we have some audience questions, but I want to give other folks a real quick opportunity just to talk about how Prince or Vanity might show up in your work, or has shown up, or has influenced your work and gotten you to this stage. Also, there doesn't have to be an answer. You could just be like, I like them, and that's fine too.
Well, I will definitely very quickly just acknowledge, I think, the obvious, that as a musician, Prince is everywhere, sometimes when I don't realize that he's there. There are things that I will hear when I'm writing, and I'll be like, that's really cool, and then I'll be driving, and I'm like, oh, damn it, I stole that, sorry. But I'm like, oh, I made that up, it's so pretty, and then it's like, no, that's from Sign of the Times. You've been listening to it for 30,000 years, that's why you keep hearing it. So definitely showing up in the music that I write and what I'm attracted to. And then even many years ago when I first started performing with the band that I was in at the time, absolutely Jill, Vanity, everybody seeped into, consciously or not, a lot of the things that I would do on stage, because they had a presence and a way that they connected with the audience, and I wanted to be able to embody that, but also in my own way. And then just in everyday life, you know, there's always a reference, there's always a thought. And I will share this. I don't think I've told many people this, but a couple of years ago, this is part of my bio, this part. I was the director of social media for the National Museum of African American Music in Nashville. And that was an incredible experience. There's all these amazing artifacts there. Please go. It's an incredible experience. But about a year ago, I had a dream that I was in, there's the entry point of the museum is called the Rivers of Rhythm. And I was in the Rivers of Rhythm looking at something on a wall, like there was water coming out of it, which, I don't know. And Vanity walked up to me and she said, "Y'all have to tell my story." And I thought about that when D'Angela reached out, and I was like, I don't know if any of that is connected, but I think that the influence of having listened to the music and seen the videos and being just inundated with the imagery for so long absolutely has seeped into pretty much everything. So all of it is connected to me, and especially through whatever musical things are happening in my life.
That is stunning. Thank you. Really.
I'll say really quickly, I think the singularity of Prince, the singularity of a Vanity 6, having the ability to have a spine and say like, and stand in yourself because you can only be you and nobody else can do it for you, I think is a huge motivation in my life that I learned very early on when listening to Prince and Vanity 6. And I think even my own relation to my body and sex and sexuality came when I first heard Nasty Girl, honestly. Because it was, in what way, I mean, I couldn't imagine being 10 years old and listening to anything else at the time that would make me feel like, well, this is what sexy means, and not in a way that felt, you know, alienating or objectifying per se. It just is more of a feeling than, you know, an aesthetic or a look. And I try to carry that with me in my writing and the things I get to publish, so just to be embodied in yourself, be as singular as possible, while also being in community. Yeah.
I love that. I do. I also love the notion of like the Nasty Girl being the one, because that to make you think about your sexuality, because when the song comes on, what's the first thing you do? Body roll. It's inevitable. So yes, if you're not asking questions about that, you should be asking questions. With that, I think we're gonna take some questions from the audience. Darling Nisi asks, to the, hi Darling Nisi. To the evolution of feminine sexuality, artists like Chloe Bailey are on my mind. New folks are being told that they're trying too hard. Was that sentiment around when Vanity 6 was new?
I would say yes. There's a lot of, I was reading a Jet interview that they did, I think in 82, or no, it might have been 83. And the interviewer is like pretty insistent on framing their questions around like, well, how much of this is like you, and like, you know, your work is hypersexual, and like kind of this disbelief of like, are you sure like this is actually the group? And so many words trying to insinuate that like this is Prince's like imprint on the group, and Vanity makes it a point to say like, it's a double standard, like men get to talk about sex day and night. We are embodying, you know, our sexuality in particular kinds of ways. And like, this is what we live and actually embody, and like, it's not, you know, for play or show as much as we enjoy performing on stage. Like, we've had many of these experiences, and so I think this idea of like, yeah, you're trying too hard or you're trying to sell a product because sex sells really characterize a lot of the thinking or the discourse around Vanity 6 in some ways, yeah.
A very interesting point, because you and I spoke a little bit last night where we were talking about how all the proteges and the protege groups were kind of Prince working out different aspects of his own psyche, his own sexuality, his own creativity. And to your point about men talking about that all the time, there's a kind of like masculine audacity in Vanity 6 to be so overt in their sexuality. And maybe you want to talk a little bit about how that might figure into just like the universe of Prince.
You know, I think with Vanity 6, Prince was definitely expressing part of what he saw in society, and he also showed that he could make these side projects a big success. I mean, let's say Vanity 6, the album did really well, right? It was like number 4 or 5 on the black charts. It was number 45 on the pop charts. It sold 500,000 copies by the end of 1985 and went gold. You know, and Prince showed that he could totally make these side projects a success. And I think that Prince, you know, I see this as a complete collaboration. You know, I don't, Vanity, they were not, I didn't see them as a blank slate. I think Prince was at his best when he was collaborating. He really, I mean, he burst on the, you know, he came on the scene even bigger with this 1999 tour, I think in part because he was collaborating. He had great collaborators in Brenda, Susan, and Denise. And I think that he was at his very best. I mean, this is a peak period for Prince. There's no denying that. His output was incredible. The quality of his output was incredible. We have essentially three Prince albums at the same time, and Prince really creating a whole narrative, which, you know, I think rolled from controversy, you know, life is just a game, we're all just the same, do you want to play, like, and Vanity singing a nasty girl, like, you know, don't you believe in mystery? Do you want to play my game? To me, it's all about the roles we play, and then all this whole world he creates rolls directly into Purple Rain. So I think this is my favorite Prince period. I just think I'm aghast at thinking that he was 24, and taking all that. And I think that's what I take from this too, is thinking of Prince just the creative power that he just harnessed and expressed. And also the women, like Susan, Brenda, and Denise, like standing on stage. I mean, Susan, his friend from high school, right? Hey, get on stage, do this. And she stepped up. She stepped up and stepped onto stage. And I'm very inspired by that.
Do you feel that, and this is a question for anyone, that these were natural expressions of their own sexuality, or, you know, to the point, how much of it was the collaboration, or how much of that was like Prince telling them, this is what you do? I don't think it's the latter, but I'm curious what folks are thinking.
I don't know. I'm very curious about that, and I believe that it's kind of a mix of the two. But how much did they choose for themselves back then? Like, if we could talk to them now. And I know that we can talk to Susan and Brenda, but even if we could ask Denise now, how much of that did you choose for yourself at that time? How much would you have done differently? But it doesn't feel forced. That's the thing. It doesn't feel like, here, put this on and be this person. It feels at least like they were in on it, like they were good with it, and they made the choices that they wanted to make for themselves at that time.
It's somewhat facetious, but also to your point, Apollonia went off and found God afterwards, and then, you know, Vanity made some choices afterwards, and it's like, was that kind of a pendulum swing from having to using that moment to express so much of themselves and feeling like, oh, I've shown too much, I've been too vulnerable, and I need to like shut it down a little bit, especially if the discourse around is like, you're trying too hard or you're doing too much. And it's like, I can see someone like a Chloe Bailey, you know, just being herself and also responding to the market, being like, y'all like sex? I got titties and ass, I could do that too. And then doing it really, really well, and then people like, you're trying too hard. And it's like, well, how much can these women actually embody that without having to like take a step back and like close up shop, or maybe regret some of it? I don't know. But it feels like that's part of the conversation.
Yeah, there was definitely some atoning for 80s sins, in air quotes, later on.
I mean, and back to the point of vulnerability, I mean, you have to imagine that these are young women at the end of the day, and there's a lot of pressure being put on them to, you know, do their best, put on a great show, like, you know, be available to media, be able to kind of double down on this folk poking at them and prodding at them around their sexuality and the ways that they embody their sexuality as performers. And, you know, that's taxing. That takes its own kind of toll. And, you know, Prince is a perfectionist, or was a perfectionist. And I could imagine that there's so many ways in which vulnerability was shoring up for, you know, these young women. And I mean, we can see the ways it probably took its toll on them, which I think is something that we could hold space for as well.
What was the line? I want to see asses jiggling. I need perfection.
Yes.
I'm like,
Yeah, no, quite
legitimately,
literally,
I
yeah.
wonder who wrote that line. This is an interesting question. What do you think Vanity 6 would look and sound like in 2023? Like if you could design your own Vanity 6, you know, would you have like a super group of like megastars, or would you get some unknown women? Like, would they have a specific kind of aesthetic? Like, who would your Vanity 6 be today?
I feel like we already have it in different ways. We have Cardi and Meg and Nicki, and we have, you know, Chloe and you know, and even, you know, Beyonce to a certain extent. I think that, I don't know, just because we don't have groups the way that we did at one time, that's kind of not happening right now. Everybody's a solo act. But I think that we have it in different iterations now, and we absolutely have the greater levels of sexual agency and expression. So it exists. I don't know. I also would want to counter that question with, would a group like Vanity 6 even work now? Like, are we, because we are so into the individual, and they were very cohesive. They each had their own personalities within the group, but they were also they were a unit all the time. So it's kind of like, do we even have the attention span to allow there to be a group? I think, you know, that would be something to consider. But I think I think that Vanity 6 type of performance and expression absolutely exists with a lot of our current artists.
We could argue that the last really successful girl group that maybe mirrors Vanity 6 was Destiny's Child. Like that last iteration, like that was the last girl group.
Yeah.
Yeah, for now. Yes, I ran out of questions over here, and I want to turn it over to you all to, like, if you have thoughts about Vanity 6 or a particular memory that comes to mind when you hear a song or see a video or just a picture. What's your like favorite Vanity 6 memory or something associated with it?
Oh, wow.
I'll tell you one. I'll give you mine, and you tell me what you want to do with this. I don't know what we were doing or where we were, but I had created some after party for a thing. I'm pretty sure I had a screening of a thing, and then folks stayed after, right? So we played some videos on this giant big screen, and one of them was Nasty Girl. And I had a friend of mine who is a performer, and he loves Nasty Girl. So I'm facing the screen. It's just me and the screen, grooving, jamming. And then a friend of mine, she's like, Chinisha. I'm like, what? She spins me around. And I'm not going to tell you who it was, but there's a gentleman who was sitting at the edge of the room watching these things, who's a pretty stern guy. He's not big on the exposition. And my friend, who's big and flamboyant, was performing Nasty Girl and decided to give him a lap dance. And I can't tell you how all of the energy, liquid, soul, air escaped out of my body through my little toe. I had nothing left. And that is, and whenever I think about that song, I think about my friend Carmen, and I think about that performance. And it terrifies me to this day. But I still love the song. So that's one of my favorite Vanity 6 memories. Did you ever get in trouble for listening to Vanity 6? Like you were playing in the house?
I actually didn't, because my mother was very strict with me, but when it came to music, my parents played literally everything. Like, my mom was a big, like, West Coast hip-hop fan, so a lot of Tupac, a lot of Too Short, a lot of E40. So, like, I didn't, which is surprising because my mother was like, oh, you're going to go hang out with friends? This is me in high school, like 16 years old. You're going to hang out with your friends? I need their phone number. I'm going to call them. I need to know where y'all going to be at. If you're home a minute later, then, so to have that kind of openness and, like, to have that kind of music and Vanity 6 played freely in the home and, like, not being punished for listening to it is pretty remarkable to me.
Yeah. My mom's going to argue with me because she's watching this live feed, so she'll probably put something in the questions as soon as I say this. But I came up, my father's like a boomer technically. My mom's technically Gen X. Like she's literally that year between. And so they were the same, like playing whatever in the house. So the first time I heard Prince was because they were playing it in the house. It wasn't a secret. But if I were to walk outside dressed like Vanity 6, I'd be in trouble. So I just want everyone to know that there's a little weird of a dichotomy there, right? Where I think having the conversation or hearing it is not necessarily the same as embodying it or talking about it or experiencing it. I definitely would have got in trouble if I tried.
Same, and I also think it's a difference between like what happens in your home versus like going out in public and like, embodying that kind of excess and around sexuality.
That's to your point about being a little fast-tailed girl. Like that was always the conversation around.
Always. I don't think I got in trouble for listening to Vanity 6 because it came later, but one of my eldest sister bought me the 1999 album for my 12th birthday. And I very distinctly remember my mom making me take it back to the store. And I did. And then the next time I went to the mall with some friends, what did I do? I bought it on cassette because I could put that in my backpack. Easy peasy. I was mad and whatever, but I wasn't supposed to be listening to that stuff. I got talked to about it a lot. My parents, were just like, this is not appropriate for you at various stages. And it wasn't. I mean, they were right, but whatever. But it's interesting because I did eventually kind of win my dad over because of the music, because my dad was really into music, and two of my sisters are here, so they can attest. And I think that he began to hear Prince's musicality. And I kind of got away with it a little, but obviously the very sexualized images of Vanity 6 and then Apollonia 6, I was not supposed to be listening to that, but I was. So I didn't necessarily get in trouble, but I knew that my mom did not, her line was, don't let me hear it coming out of your room. And I was like, bet, because I got earphones. That's not even a problem. You're not going to hear it. Not even a problem. Got you, mommy.
Does anyone here have children? Would you let your children listen to Vanity 6 unsupervised?
They've listened to worse.
Probably, yes.
Probably.
Is that something that you share with them? Like, do you talk about Prince and Vanity?
I do. I have attempted to indoctrinate my children. Okay, and I have somewhat been successful. My college-age son is really coming around because his college roommate is a huge Prince fan, right? So, so I mean, it's difficult as a parent, right? Because you're so uncool that anything you like automatically gets rejected. I mean, but I have attempted, and I think I would definitely like to watch Vanity 6 with my boy. We've got 2 boys, and I would definitely like to watch that with them, get their reactions. I was really, the Gen Z discussion is really fascinating to me. I think my kids' reactions would be real similar.
Yeah, I used to teach, and I used to have young people, like high school and college age kids, and so I was always that that person playing that kind of music, and I once had a kid come up to me, because I always used to say, I say word, like word up, like that cameo, that's normal. And you make fun, like, yeah, that's right, Chinisha, word. I'm like, boy, if you don't shut up and just sit down. It's weird. Like, they have such a different entry point, and I don't think I realized that. And I think it's an interesting part of aging. This is just me talking at this point. But there is an interesting part of aging where things that are normalized, like the way that we think about vanity and our connection to them, is not necessarily their approach. And I'm always super curious about how they see it for the first time. What are their eyes looking at for the first time? I'll give one more question, and then I'll ask D'Angelo if we have some audience in the room questions. In terms of you being young what was it like? Who were you? What was your mindset when you heard a Vanity song for the first time? Like, were you that nerdy kid, or were you
like I said, in real time, I wasn't aware of Vanity, but I heard 1999. I was shocked and thrilled at the same time, scintillated. I mean, I think, the sexuality, the openness was thrilling. And I think, Prince's whole approach at that time was sort of question authority, right? And there's nothing that appeals more to, your typical teenager than questioning how society's run and I think 1999, the whole idea of like, well, this whole dystopian world, right, is how it very much looked to us. You know, we're hiding under wooden desks, thinking that's going to save us from nuclear holocaust. You know, and it seemed ridiculous, right? And in the face of that, it's just this hedonistic approach of like, hey, let's party. You know, and I think most teenagers could understand. So I think it was shock, awe, and thrill.
All appropriate reactions, I think. It's kind of funny because it's kind of where we are right now, right? There's a war. There's a potential war between two superpowers.
Recession looming, so they say.
Children are hiding under desks because people have guns and keep breaking into buildings. You know, we have war on, procreating people's bodies, and what can we really do? What can we? And let's go party.
I don't have a specific memory of the first time I heard Vanity 6. I just know that I did at some point in my late tweens, early teens. But one of the things that I did find to be really interesting and fun was that, so I started experimenting with my own music creation and songwriting around 11 and 12 years oldish, and I was mostly writing songs about whatever boy I liked, who of course didn't like me back. So what I liked about Vanity 6's album was that there did not ever seem to be any element of them caring about that. It's like, you're gonna do this, and you're gonna like me or not, and I'm going to do what I wanna do, but I am not invested in how you feel about me. And I think that for me, even now, I sometimes wish that I had, both as a human being and as a songwriter, a greater ability to express that feeling of, it's my thing, and you're either with it or you're not, but I'm not gonna sit here and cry. Now, that does not mean that any of those women felt like that all the time. They probably did not, but at least in the musical presentation, it was like, he's dull, that's a no. You need to do this, that's not enough, wake me up later. And there's just something about that is so fun, and that is, if I were to want to, tell other teenage girls, for example, to be like, you know what, get your parents' permission maybe, but listen to this, because there's something about not caring about whether or not someone else feels for you the way that, whatever. And that definitely made an impression on me, even though it didn't necessarily reflect what I was able to, harness in my own personal space. I just love the fact that comes across in the record the way that it does.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially if a girl answers "Don't hang up," there's that moment of like, she calls thinking she's calling her man, some shorty picks up and she's like, well, you can have him. Like, the whole arc of that speaks entirely to that, well, it's still not good enough for me, he's yours now. Which is, I think it's really especially hard as an artist to have that level of confidence. Like, when you are an artist, you put everything on the stage, you put everything on your art, and you hope that people receive it. And so it's especially difficult to be able to embody that kind of energy, and also have people look at you and judge you for your art in the process of that. It's a lot happening.
And I think when you're young, I first came across Vanity 6's work as a preteen, so I think there's a certain amount of self-loathing that you're expected to have of yourself, especially as a young black girl, that listening to that kind of shifted that for me. I was very boyish. I hung out with the boys in my neighborhood, played basketball and sports, and I kind of felt like I had to hate femininity or my own girlhood in order to to get folk to like me. But listening to Nasty Girl for the first time, it's like, oh, that's the thing. That's something, that's femininity at its highest form, and that's something that I connect with, that doesn't feel denigrating, that doesn't feel like it's something that's being sold back to me, but that is, again, to this point of embodiment, that's deeply embodiment, and it's more about how it makes me feel versus, the aesthetic or the thing that I'm supposed to want. Yeah.
Did it make you go out and I gotta go get this skirt, fuck these tomboy shoes, I'm good?
Maybe not that, but it definitely made me feel like, oh, sexiness is a thing that I could feel, is something that I don't have to have shame around. Like, femininity isn't something that I should have to loathe and try and push deep down and disidentify with. So I definitely did that for me.
that with like Prince in general. I feel like listening to Prince and then listening to Prince through Vanity 6 is like giving yourself permission to be your weirdest self, to be your truest self, even if it's like a little bit awkward or strange or sometimes, you know, too rough, or like sometimes you gotta go upside somebody's head, or sometimes you want to wear that evening gown or ride a horse with some lingerie and do coke in the back, whatever, you know what I'm talking about. Like it's the permission to be that person that you might not have had, and like to do it with such a funky groove in the background. It's like, oh, I could be this person. Yeah. I'm gonna turn to D'Angela now, and I think we have some audience questions coming in.
So Cadence is in the back. If you have the note cards, you can take them. If not, I have a question.
No cards? Oh, y'all are just killing it. No questions?
Arthur has Cadence over here. There's some people who want to ask some questions. So while they're writing it down and Cadence is delivering more Post-its, one of my questions is, do you listen to this album, like before the request came, to appear at the symposium? Is this like one of your staple Prince albums? Or if it's not a staple Prince album, is there a staple song on this that's not Nasty Girl? Because I mean, obviously, everybody loves Nasty Girl, and it actually gets played a lot out in the world, out in the wild. You can hear Nasty Girl all of the time, which is fantastic. And just a little bit of commentary. I think some of Prince's music is timeless, meaning like you can't really place it within a particular time period. I think Nasty Girl is one of those songs because it's just timeless. It just never ages. It sounds good every single time you hear it. It is fresh as the morning dew. Like it's just like this never-ending. Like and what's crazy about it is that this is not Prince's only song that does that, but it's definitely one of the top of the top. So like in terms of its legacy as an album, in terms of your personal listenership, is this an album that you pull out when you want to listen to Prince? Because I mean, all Prince produced records to me are Prince records, just to be clear.
It would be if I had it on something other than cassette. If anybody who has some power out there is listening, we need it on streaming and whatever. Because I would love to be able to turn it on when I'm getting ready to go out or just when I'm just doing whatever at the house. But I don't have anything to play it on right now, so otherwise it would be.
I think I can say for myself that I now have listened to to Vanity 6 more times than would be considered normal or healthy. But I do wish that we had a reissue or just get it on Spotify.
Yeah, I think the way that I first listened to the album was through vinyl and records, and I have a copy of the record, so I don't get to play it as much because streaming is just the default and like easier sometimes. I also have CDs at home, but it's like using the particular laptop that still takes CDs and like
who still has a CD player? Like,
so it's a whole thing. But I think before this roundtable, I didn't listen to the album as a whole as much as I would like obviously Nasty Girl, because it's the first song on the album. It's so strong. It holds up over space and time in a way that I think the rest of the album is so particular to its moment, and a lot of the sounds coming. It's a great album, but I think a lot of the other tracks are so rooted in early 1980s and Prince's cultivation of sound in that particular moment that I don't think I played it as much as any other Prince album.
I think I might have only listened to the album once, front to back, on vinyl, and I have it at home. But like, as to your point, I don't. Who's flipping on let me just throw something on a little record player real quick? Not normally. And even in coming to do this, trying to like revisit to go listen to it on streaming, I'm still chasing down boots on YouTube. Like, I thought we were past this. It's really rough. So I think that is also part of like it's not part of the public consciousness because it's just so inaccessible right now. But they play Nasty Girl the same way they play like Kiss everywhere. It's like I'm low-key a little bit sick of it. Not as much as Kiss, but it's a lot. It's out there. I just quickly, do we have more questions that we want to? And if you have bad handwriting, just ask your friend next to you, because that's okay too. Right. Okay. Question. I don't know who this is from. You can put your name on it too. Does the panel have any thoughts on how socioeconomic class factors into quote unquote good girl versus quote unquote nasty girl groups in Black communities, especially Vanity 6? Interesting. So how do socioeconomic class how does, the grammar is off on this.
No, I get the question. No, I got the question. I got the question.
It's there. How does race and class figure into a good girl versus a bad girl group? Thank you.
I think it has a lot. I think it does shape the ways that we cultivate the good, or notions of the good girl versus the nasty girl. And this reminds me of Destiny's Child, Nasty Girl, which I think a lot of folk don't understand that video is like satire. Like, they're not being total pick-me's. But that's aside. But I do think that, we denigrate folk based upon how they get to be in the world and the space, the kind of the position that they have to occupy. So like, there's ways that, a poor working class Black woman could never be the good girl, right? Could never occupy that kind of idealization. Just as I think a lot of the ways that we think about, another term comes to mind of like, in relation to nasty, like hoe, right? Who gets to be the hoe, and how is that in relation to, the nexus of race, class, and gender, right? You wouldn't call a white woman a hoe. I haven't used that. That's a particular vernacular that is meant to locate someone in a particular, space. And so, absolutely, I think there's a way that class shows up in the context of a Vanity 6. Like, and also I think, pigmentocracy and colorism shows up in Vanity 6 as well. Like, you get to embody your sexuality in a particular kind of way because you look a certain way, right? That you get to be a part of the color line in a particular kind of way. So I think all of those things do shape the kind of sexual purchase that a group like Vanity 6 can have in the early 1980s.
To Darlene Nisi's earlier question about Chloe Bailey, do we see some of that critique being because she's a brown-skinned woman?
Yes.
Yeah, I would agree. There was even that, who was the city, state name? I don't remember. But there was a brown woman who was on air. She was an on-air correspondent for some local news station who was wearing a dress, but she's a voluptuous woman. She's got a body. And she was receiving hate mail and criticism. Probably, curly hair, yeah. And she was receiving criticism as a woman of color because of her body shape. And then she showed, she had the receipts. She showed her colleagues wearing the same exact dress, but as a blonde white woman, and how that same exact, and skinny blonde white woman, and that same dress was acceptable on her body because it wasn't sexualized in the way that it was on her not white body. Whose question was that? Can we get a hand raise on that one? Does that answer? Sorry. My bad. I'm just trying to get some jokes in. Working on a bit, that's all.
I also wanted to ask about, throw in Janet Jackson because
Yes.
we're not a group, obviously, but from just like the good girl, bad girl dynamic and how she emerges right after.
You even brought up an interesting point with Destiny's Child about not being a pick-me, but then there is the same moment where they do cater to you, and it's like, girl, that's not your brand. You did the whole thing about I'm a survivor, and then you come out and like, but I'll cook your dinner, and it's like, it's not the same. Like, how do we determine these images? Like, could we ever see a Vanity 6 talking about, let me go get your slippers, and heat up a bath? Like, it's absolutely not their brand.
I think to your point about Janet Jackson, I think, she and Madonna are contemporaries, and I totally see Madonna getting taken up in a way in our contemporary moment as like this, this mother figure. Like, she is the innovator for, a Cardi B or a Meg when it's like, Janet's literally right there. Like, even for Britney Spears, you can see Janet in her performativity and embodiment through and through. So I do think there is a way that, again, race is shaping the way that we relate these women to, like, their sexuality and being an icon, right, a sexual icon in particular, that I find very fascinating.
I've never seen Madonna do a single dance move that could match even a Britney Spears, much less a Janet Jackson. So you're absolutely right. I'm going to try to get in as many of these questions as we can. The next one, the Mary Jane Girls, produced by Rick James and regarded as a response to Vanity 6, is not discussed with the enthusiasm as Vanity 6. Do you think the legacy of these groups can be a reflection of the legacies of Prince versus Rick James?
Ooh,
Hell yes.
Yes. It's beef. It's beef. That's a great. Yeah, that's beef. Yeah.
Something I think is interesting, though, I would say that Rick does not get the shine that he should. And I think that a lot of the reason for that is because of all of the other stuff. So, and this might make some people online mad, but, you know, argue with your mama. I think it's also the same thing with somebody like an Ike Turner. The music is overshadowed by the bullshit. And so you can't talk about Rick without inevitably talking about the other stuff that takes you away from his brilliance as a musician. So yeah, I absolutely think that the Mary Jane Girls don't get the same kind of conversation. But I also feel like, because they are not identical groups. You know, even if on some level the Mary Jane Girls may have been a response to Vanity 6, they were just done in a very different way. And you have two very different musical collections. Yes. They're both iconic. I mean, if you drop Nasty Girl and In My House in this room, we're all hitting this floor, right? So, but I don't think that we're talking about an apples to apples comparison either. So I think that maybe it's appropriate, you know, to kind of separate the two and have those two conversations in different spaces. But the Mary Jane Girls, I think, are just as important to what was happening with regards to women's sexuality in music in the 1980s as Vanity.
I mean, the Mary Jane Girls had a lot of hits.
I was gonna say, like, as far as vocalists goes,
Yeah,
they were
no tea, no
definitely-
shade, but like,
They were truly
I
the
mean,
stronger between
yeah,
those groups. But, you know, to your point about Rick, like, Rick was doing Rick, and then that takes a lot away from, you know, being tapped into the magic of Prince helped Vanity 6 quite a lot, and that can't be understated.
I think also the messiness around, I guess the perceived messiness around the relationship between Rick and Prince, and the idea that Prince stole Rick's idea for Vanity 6, and, you know, this tit for tat thing really does a disservice to what these women were able to do. And so we're more so tapped into, well, Prince is better because, and Rick James is better and he stole his idea, when it's like, you know, they both brought wonder to our musical lives in their particular moment. And I think, yeah, the men always, their pettiness kind of drowns out, you know, the contributions of the women. So
I mean, this has nothing to do with Vanity 6, but I feel a lot about that when I listen to Party all the time. And I'm like, you know, it was goofy, but it could have been greater had it not been like Rick with the beads in the back, just like, hey, he was silly in a way that could have been bigger. You know, I mean, Rick was just out here. You know? Anyway, Eddie, is there an Eddie in the house? We have a question here. Thank you, Eddie. This is a fun one for the panel. Who would each of you be from the group Vanity 6 and why? That's a good one, though. That's a good one.
I call Susan. I know I'm supposed to be Brenda.
I think they're going to ask us to sing.
I'm like, Brenda, I would say Brenda because I feel like looking back at their interviews, Brenda was so sure of herself. She had a very strong sense of herself. She was always, you know, unafraid to kind of double down in an interviewer trying to like play in her face. And so, or to also take up for her, you know, her bandmates when folk are trying to play. Like, she's like, no, actually, you know, we all have life experience. And like, just because we're only a couple years in age difference doesn't mean that X, Y, and Z. So yeah, I really admire that about her. I guess I identify with that.
I don't know. I'm leaning towards Brenda. because she's got such an amazing voice. And I don't sing like her, but I've always been drawn to her voice. And I think to what you were saying, just the assuredness and the don't cross me-ness, which I love that about her, about at least the persona that we see in the group. And then as I've gotten older, I have tried to tap into the Vanity energy, which is why I'm up here dressed like this.
Let them know.
Because I think that there's, again, something very empowering and strong and also vulnerable. And I think with all three of the women, you get different things, but you get vulnerability. There's not a wall. It's, you can talk to me. You can, I am a full person, but I definitely think, to answer the question that Eddie had, probably more Brenda than anyone else, I should say.
And just to round it out, why pick Susan?
Okay, so Susan, as a person, what I know of her from interviews, I just really think she's down to earth. She's pragmatic. I mean, I saw her interviewed and she's like, hey, I told my parents it's a job. And my parents were like, go, good, go. So I'm like, I like that energy. She's like, hey, I'm out here. I'm working it like a job, right, Michael Dean? I like that about Susan.
How much was Vanity 6 a response? Oh, this was next question. So how much was Vanity 6 in response to Mary Jane Girl? So, is there a difference in the sexuality displayed by Vanity 6 versus what followed about a decade later in hip hop, vis-a-vis Lil' Kim, Foxy Brown, that whole era? I wonder. Yeah, I mean, like, just off the top of my head, thinking about Lil' Kim in the Crush on You video, right? You could have pulled that out of the closet from any of the Vanity 6 videos. But, I mean, I guess this goes back to the earlier response about socioeconomic class and race, and how that definitely figured into the shaping of a Foxy Brown or a Lil' Kim, perhaps. I don't know if there are other.
I mean, I think they're both they're coming up. The similarity is that they both have to deal with this very deeply homosocial space where it's just men around all the time, right? And the men get to be the kind of primary interlocutors a lot of the time, and the men aren't making all the decisions, but they get to make a lot of the big decisions around, what happens vis-a-vis like creative processes. So I think that makes them similar. I think what makes them different is class, a kind of class dynamic between Kim and Foxy versus the members of Vanity 6. And I think it's a different geography. It's a different, it's a kind of Midwest. I won't say that's the entire map of Vanity 6's output and creation, but it's definitely rooted in this kind of Midwesternness that is very different and distinct from a place like New York City. So I think that shapes just the kinds of way that they are embodying their sexuality in the context of an urbanity or in an urban space, which is always code for black, black, brown. Yeah. So I think all those things are shaping the ways that they relate to their sexuality and are embodying their sexuality.
How do you think we're meant to read Vanity, as a group like Vanity 6? Are they supposed to present as working class? Are they supposed to present as glam and high class and moneyed? But obviously not until they start to see the success from the album. So, your interpretation, what do you think we see? I don't really know, because you could get that from the local thrift shop if you wanted to. That's not a look that is not unachievable at that time either. They are kind of like the every girl.
I think they are the every girl. And I think, the 80s were a time of grit and glamour. I just think Vanity Six just embodies it all so perfectly. You know, they've got kind of that gritty, like every woman kind of vibe, but then they've got the hair, the makeup, the, you know, sexy lingerie, so that they are the 80s to me.
I think it's interesting too, because with Kim and Foxy, we knew absolutely that these were black girls from New York, right?
Mm-hmm.
With Vanity Six, with the exception of Brenda, you're kind of like, oh, those other two are brown, but what are they? And I think that because that was a question that was never really answered, I don't know that it ever even came up. There was a little bit more latitude that they could have. I know that, you know, being a young adult when Kim and Foxy hit the scene, again, I was like, whoa, like, I wish I could do that stuff. Those girls are really, you know, they're pretty and they seem to be very, very confident, but then I also remember a lot of the discourse around them, and are they too sexual, and are they this, and it's just kind of like, why can't we just like jam to their stuff? I mean, they're killing it as artists, but that was often the conversation, was kind of, you know, disembodying them from their music and making the conversation always about what they did or did not have on, and what they were doing with their bodies, and who they were sleeping with, and whatever, all of that. So,
Especially in that context of that hyper dominant male space, I was like, you will never not be a woman, and you will never not be regarded by what you're wearing, what you're doing, what your body looks like, all of that. Absolutely. We have time for just one more question, I believe. And it's my last one, so that works out. What would Vanity Six be like if Jill Jones were added in an alternate universe? I love it. I love it. Was that Tammy over there? Yes, I figured. Yes. My last question for y'all. If you had walk-off music right now, anywhere in the Prince universe, what's your walk off the stage music and why?
there's so many. Wonderful Ass.
Okay.
Because it's an excellent song to strut to. So,
Absolutely.
You know, you can catch a rhythm with it. So.
Just say catch a rhythm. Listen.
I would say Erotic City. It's like just one of my favorite songs of all time ever. Just in the whole wide world universe of music, and it just always makes me feel amazing. So yeah, I'd have to say that one.
I don't know what it says about me. Oh, God. Irresistible bitch.
Says it all.
That's right.
My walk-off music would be Mountains, the extended remix. And I have it written into my will. So if y'all come to my funeral, guess what you're gonna hear?
That's hardcore.
It's my farewell to everyone.
Wow.
Right? Have a party. It's my permission for everyone to have a party at my funeral. On that note, we're gonna walk off, but I want to thank everyone here in the room, Jill and D'Angela, and I see Troy back. Is that Troy Gua back there? Hi, friends. Yes, it's like a family reunion. Miss TLC has joined us today. We have speakers from our later panels, DJ Monday Blue. I'm just naming my friends. Sorry, guys. I want to thank everyone at home for tuning in and streaming and providing. And Neil Dash is here. Let me not act like I don't see him. Want to thank everyone who's on streaming. I want to thank all of our wonderful speakers today who brought such like glam and fun to our afternoon. And I'm going to turn this back over to D'Angela. And let's give everyone a round of applause.